So good morning, everyone. I'm Yannis Kourniotis from Lambadarios law firm. Nico, thank you so much for inviting me once again in New York. We'll be discussing today about energy transition. And let me make, a small opening statement. As the world leaders gathered at COP in Dubai, there's a widespread acknowledgement of the scale of action required to address climate change by accelerating the development of low-carbon energy sources while also decarbonizing industry and transportation. This global energy transition will require large-scale construction of renewables and other low-carbon infrastructure worldwide, as well as the development and implementation of new technologies and the scaling up of existing ones. Investment in batteries for energy storage and electric vehicles, carbon capture and storage, sustainable aviation fuels, and green hydrogen, among others, are needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in hard-to-abate sectors in addition to power generation. We are fortunate enough to have today 6 specialists, 6 leaders on their field. We have 3 large corporates and 3 large banks, both nationally and internationally. I will start with Ravina Advani, Head of Energy and Natural Resources and Renewables Coverage, Head of Low Carbon Transition Group Americas, BNP Paribas. She knows a lot about the topic, and actually I'm about to address the very first question. Ravina, how can we credibly, and I stress the word credibly in terms of technology, facilitate the development of the energy transition? And if possible, can you please discuss on your role in the process and how do you see yourselves in Greece?
Perfect, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. And all of those technologies that you mentioned, and even some of the commentary prior to this panel just around greening Greece's economy, are music to my ears, because as a banker, this is really where we want to be spending our time, is really investing in the energy transition, which is very much underway. The financial industry as a whole plays a really important part in combating this climate crisis that's in front of us. And when I look at BNP Paribas as one participant in the broader financial industry, we have put ESG at the forefront of everything that we've been doing for the past decade and counting. We have financial and investment policies in place that restrict what we can do in the fossil fuel industry, specifically as it relates to coal, as it relates to mining, as it relates to upstream oil and gas, as it relates to unconventional oil and gas. And even earlier this year, the bank put forward a 2030 plan to really accelerate our pivot from fossil fuels. We've been doing a lot of things over the years, but this plan is very tangible and very concrete, and it's very much well underway. And we're doing it with an eye to ensure that we're doubling down our efforts in the low carbon space, which is a multi-trillion-dollar space. When you look at the energy transition spend last year alone, it exceeded over $1 trillion in CapEx. And depending on the report that you pick up, that's really going to reach anywhere from $5 to $10 trillion annually, therein representing an opportunity for the financial industry and for many of us in this room. We, as a bank, are doing a lot. We've been growing many of our product offerings to ensure that we can support our clients really across the capital stack, whether it relates to equity, whether it relates to debt. We're expanding our technology focus. When you look at the industry just 3 years ago, a lot of our efforts were focused on wind and solar globally, but now we're looking at hydrogen, we're looking at carbon sequestration, many of the technologies that Yannis outlined for you that were very topical at COP. And lastly, we're riding the tailwinds that exist right now. There's a lot of focus on the net zero momentum, the innovation in the industry, and all of the policy support. I won't touch on the IRA, but we're excited about Greece's National Energy Climate Plan. And as a big bank, Greece plays a very critical role in our broader transition efforts for all of the reasons that the prior panelists were talking about. There is a lot of transition that's underway. underway in terms of solar and wind and even the floating LNG. That's infrastructure that we as a bank are financing and supporting. And we are excited about the battery storage, the additional interconnection that is going to be required to help Greece achieve its net zero plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravina. And I'm moving forward to Kostas Vassiliou, Deputy CEO, Eurobank. No need to say much about Kostas. I'm going, straight to the topic. Kostas, what kind of and scale of projects in the energy field are to be implemented in Greece, and how these projects are to change the state of play? Is it possible for the Greek banking system to support the energy transition of the country?
Thank you, Yannis. Thank you for having us. Maybe I shouldn't focus on the magnitude of the projects, in what sense that I think our audience heard Mr. Pyatt, that actually he knows extremely well Greece, and then Minister Skylakakis, and I think actually he described in detail exactly what's happening in Greece right now. The only thing that I can say is that I fully confirm of what has been heard, because people sometimes are skeptical about politicians. I can tell you as a technocrat that actually what you have heard is exactly what's happening in Greece right now. So we'll move maybe to the next question regarding the financing of these projects. Actually, I'm very lucky today, because I'm in a panel that besides having next to me Vassilis, Petros and Konstantinos, that besides the colleagues from the international banks, that I'm honored of being in the same panel with them. I'm very lucky in the sense that I will give some real current examples of financing. For example, with HELLENiQ Energy, recently with my colleague Vassilis and the National Bank of Greece, we just concluded a very innovative transaction for financing the acquisitions of renewable sources projects in the magnitude of the debt was close to 750 million euros. With Petros and Motor Oil, we supported the acquisition of Anemos, and we're working in various transactions on the renewables side, and of course supporting both in HELLENiQ Energy and Motor Oil large projects on their balance sheet for the fair decarbonization and reducing the CO2 emissions in the refineries. Last but not least, with Konstantinos and PPC Renewables, first of all, recently in a very important joint ventures that they have with RWE. The first project was 3 clusters of 1 gigawatt, and ourselves, jointly with other Greek banks, but also the RRF, we financed all these projects. These projects had a total size of 800 million. And recently, actually, we're very proud, jointly, allow me to say, that we just financed the largest PV in Europe, not in Greece, the famous 𝒏𝒑 project, which is a 550 megawatt project. So the answer is clearly yes. And actually, we made some detailed analysis, and in all the areas that Minister Skylakakis mentioned, we see that the total investments that will take place between 23 and 27 in the country in the broader energy sector will exceed 12 billion euros. And actually, more than half of them are already approved and committed by the Greek banks. I would like to emphasize in 2 more areas. It's not just having the liquidity and the capital. I would like to emphasize that the terms that we offer are extremely competitive, and it's not just a marketing or a pitch speech. We have so many investors coming outside Greece that could potentially bring their own banks in financing the projects in Greece. What we hear from them is that they're getting the same or even better terms, both in terms of tenors, pricing, flexibility, and so on and so forth, by getting financing from the Greek banks compared to the international banks. Last but not least, I will stay in innovation and the capacity of definitely the Eurobank team, but I believe also the other Greek banks on innovation and structuring capability. I will give a recent example. Mr. Skylakakis mentioned the pumping storage facility of Amfilohia. This is a very innovative project. There are not so many projects. Actually, it's the first one across Europe. And ourselves as Eurobank, we had the honor of Terna Energy asking us to structure and lead this transaction. We structured and actually we invited EIB, and you know how structured notorious EIB is, to look at the facility, and actually we didn't have any comments in our terms. It's so the Greek banks have the liquidity, they have the capital to support the projects, they offer competitive terms, and also they have the structuring capability for such complex transactions. Thank you, Yannis.
Thank you, Kostas. It's so nice to see how all these aforementioned projects fit in with Eurobank's strategy. And I'm moving on to Vassilis Tsaitas, Group CFO, HELLENiQ Energy. Vassili, can you please provide us with a global view of the energy transition process and in particular of its opportunities as well as threats? And if possible, a few words about the strategy of HELLENiQ and how does this fit in with the new environment?
Thank you, Yanni. Many thanks to HELLENiQ for having us one more year, and good afternoon to all. Well, I think in order to discuss about energy transition, it's important to set the scene and expectations from what is proving to be a long and difficult journey in order to understand, first of all, the role of the sector as a whole, the contribution from each of the segments, as well as the end game. For us at HELLENiQ Energy, this is very relevant because we are among those energy groups that are diversified and produce both molecules and electrons, and we believe that the transition process refers to both, actually. I think it's important to understand also that when discussing about energy transition, we need to bear in mind that this is a multidimensional process, and we need to solve for various factors. The three most important of those, and we should always bear those in mind, are sustainability, security of supply, and cost. I think Europe, over the last several years, has been focused too much on sustainability. And the recent energy crisis in Europe following the invasion on Ukraine clearly showed us that when you're too focused on one of those and you overlook the others, that strategy may backfire. So we need to acknowledge that transition will take time. It will come at a significant cost for the society, for corporates, and that we need to manage all those considerations, the three main at least, in the best possible way. Before I move on to the industry, I think it's important to understand how Greece fits into these three. So in terms of sustainability, Greece has the second largest load factors for both PV and wind in continental Europe, so definitely well placed to support that dimension. In terms of security of supply, Greece can be a gateway for the production and transportation of energy in all its forms, whether it's electricity, natural gas, or oil, and prove its position as a guarantor of security of supply in the East Med region. And in terms of costs, Greece, it was mentioned also before, has the size of diversified energy corporates. Some of us are sitting in, representatives of some of us are sitting in this panel today, that can drive innovation. They have the right quantum to conduct the large investments required in order to drive innovation and bring costs down. So back to the industry, I think we need to confirm that traditional energy, if I may use the term, like oil and gas and its derivatives, will continue playing a significant role in the energy sector for several decades to come. So by acknowledging that, we need to also understand that fossil fuels will be part of the solution and not the problem, and we need to see how we evolve them and decarbonize them in order to make them relevant for the future. So you have a number of technologies. Some of them are out there already, some of them are emerging, and over the next few years they will become more economical. We cannot provide all the answers right now, but we're more in a discovery and testing mode, but certainly we'll be able to provide the solutions. The first obvious step for the oil and gas industry is to decarbonize its operations at the process of emitting CO2. So improving energy efficiency, capturing CO2, it was mentioned before, initially storing it, but then through the use of energy carriers like hydrogen, transform it into greener forms of energy, like methanol, ammonia, and synfuels. Now, the industry of liquid fuels production is very well placed to lead the journey in this transformation, and as I mentioned before, is being part of the solution through converting conventional fuel oils into greener forms of molecules. I think a good example is our core business, our refining business, which is currently the largest producer and consumer of hydrogen globally. So you do have the know-how in order to be able to evolve it into greener forms. In terms of commercialization, usually refiners are the companies that they put together the networks required in order to now we're selling liquid fuels in their current form. In the future, we could commercialize hydrogen for transportation in the global set. Moving on to Greece, so the second question, Yanni, and how it fits into the picture. We've been changing the chemical substance of carbon and hydrogen molecules to create fossil fuels and provide energy for our main market. So now what we have to do is we need to make sure that we evolve this business into the future and make it more relevant. So we have our own plan to improve the energy efficiency and autonomy of our refining business, as well as capture CO2 and store it anywhere between 0.5 to 1 million tons of capture. Part of that, we're looking into ways to utilize the CO2, and with the support of hydrogen through electrolyzers that will convert water to green hydrogen powered by renewables, will make synfuels which have a much lower footprint in terms of both Scope 1 and 2, as well as Scope 3. In what we call new energy, we have come a long way, so renewables effectively, we have come a long way over the last few years. We currently have established a sizable position with 356 megawatt of operating capacity. We're actually, across technologies, we're the largest PV operator in Greece currently. And we're also developing in 3 countries outside of Greece, so Cyprus, North Macedonia, and Romania, following recent steps that we have undertaken. Our plan is to get, and have the projects in order to get to above 1 gigawatt of operating capacity in the next couple of years, and then more than double that by the end of the decade, without considering our ventures in offshore wind. So effectively, that will help us to decarbonize the electricity supply of our refineries in an accelerated way, grow our business, our total portfolio, through a zero CO2 carbon footprint earnings avenue, reduce the volatility of our earnings, which is more friendly for investors, capture integration value in areas like energy management and profiling that renewables would require. And certainly, last but not least, take advantage of cross-selling opportunities. Let us not forget that we have an interface with millions of customers through our retail franchise, both in Greece as well as other countries in Southeastern Europe. So we want to make sure that we're relevant for our customers now in order to come and buy diesel or gasoline from our petrol stations. In the future, we need to provide them the green energy to run their vehicles or run their business and heat their homes. So thank you, Yanni, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vassili. I will pass on the torch now to Petros Tzannetakis, Mr. Petros Tzannetakis, Deputy CEO, Moderator. Petros, What does energy transition mean for Greece? Which tools does the country have to achieve decarbonization? And how does it prioritize them? And given that motor oil is an oil major, I'm tempted to ask you, what are the competitive advantages of an oil major like motor oil when developing a large green energy platform like MORE?
Hello? Yes, you can hear me. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you for being here. It's indeed a pleasure, as Nicholas Bornozis has been a classmate of mine in school and even in the same section many, many years ago. So it is, double pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ambassador Pyatt, for covering so well the part of the geopolitical importance of Greece and the energy transition that happens in this part of the world, and to Mr. Skylakakis for highlighting the steps that the Greek government has been taking so rigorously over the past few years. I will start referring a little bit, since this is an investment conference, it's an economic conference for Greek companies. Let us remember where we were in 2010, 2011. We were nowhere. The banks that are on the panel would look us with big, big question marks, even though there were our core banks and we had the privilege to bank with them back then. Projects simply were very, very difficult, not only to be thought of, but to be financed. And there was a huge challenge that companies like all of us, or with different reasons, each one of us, who could do, in order to survive. So the state of the economy was in a much more backwards position compared to all the North European partners. And the supply chains, the materials, the affordability of anything which we were trying to do at the time was simply very, very difficult, almost impossible. 2011, 2023, 12 years later. Yes, 12 years. 12 years later, we are at a step where we are now investment grade. Hopefully next year, the Athens Stock Exchange will enter the developed markets. And all the banks, not only the ones which are present, with whom we always were close, but all other international banks always continue looking at us. And Greece has really made huge strides. Mr. Skylakakis explained and gave all the numbers, indeed, how important renewables are becoming, what percentage out of our electricity is out of renewables. I remember the Prime Minister mentioned that sometime in October, for so many hours during the one day, we were only supplied with renewable electricity, out of renewable energy. So I prefer not to go into too much detail because it has been covered by most of the speakers, but I would like to say that energy with our own means is what now matters in Greece: sun, wind, and sea. So let's do more of the same, in which we know how to do it well, and all of us here have our own experience, bigger or smaller, in this field. Bringing us to motor oil and how we had to survive and move into this period. Clearly we had all the problems that I just described. Maybe because we're an export refinery, we were sort of insulated to a certain extent, as most of our production would be exported in the greater Southeast Europe area, Eastern Mediterranean, which again is one of the very, very big advantages this country has. And at last now, the government, the ministers, and the outside world is realizing and recognizing. So we, being in the fossil fuel, a very advanced refinery, one of the most advanced refineries in Europe as far as technology is concerned, we had to look at the next day. We had to look, how will this refinery be around in 10, 15 years from now? So these questions came to us 2018, 2017, 2019, these 2 years, really, 5 years ago. And so we moved in creating 4 pillars, where the first pillar would be the traditional refining business, where we set very strict criteria into how are we going to take our investment decisions when investing in the refining business. Less than 5 years repayment period, net debt to EBITDA not higher than 3.5 times, so that our credit investors and our banks and everybody else is happy. And the second pillar, which is retail, where we were already very present through the Shell and Avi networks, this is gradually transforming into smart shops, mini markets, charging stations of our former petrol stations. The third pillar was and is renewables. We were fortunate with, as Kostas mentioned, with some acquisition, some M&A activity we did in Greece over the past few years. And so from zero, we are now having 832 megawatts operating in a very big pipeline. And last but not least, cyclical economy, waste management, because this is another field where Greece is very much behind. We get a lot of penalties from the European Union for not abiding by the rules. And so we entered this field as well because we believe there is future. So a refinery that was trying to finance its oil back in 2011 to find banks to open letters of credit because the Greek banks were not acceptable by our suppliers at the time, to moving and being a pioneer in widening, broadening our operations. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petros. And we are moving on to Nomura, PJ Deschenes. Every year you provide us, with detail about, evolution, in the sector. So I'm hugely tempted to ask you, the mega trends currently in the energy transition are low carbon fuels and offshore wind, in which you are both heavily involved. Can you please provide us with an overview? And given that we discussed about oil majors and that are in the process of redefining themselves, can you please provide us with real-life examples in which you are involved in that process? Thank you, PJ.
Sure, certainly. So I represent part of Nomura's investment bank called Nomura Greentech. So we do what it sounds like we do. We focus on everything related to sustainable technology and infrastructure. And the last year has been an exciting period. I think we've seen a lot of what's been reflected in the comment of the last two gentlemen have spoken, which is large incumbent energy companies thinking about how they expand investments into various aspects of energy transition. In addition to what's been mentioned, some of the things that we've been involved in include BP's acquisition of its joint venture called LightSource, which is about 60 gigawatts of solar development in 19 countries, including Greece. So that's a very material transaction in terms of how a large energy major is not just thinking about solar and storage development and building out that infrastructure, but is also doing it as a furtherance of their own ambitions in converting renewable electrons into other commodities like hydrogen. And that's something I'll talk a little bit more about, which we see as a really exciting piece of what's on the horizon. Here domestically, we do quite a bit in the U.S., working with U.S. companies. The U.S. has a big renewable energy development market. Repsol out of Spain is an example of a company that we brought into the U.S. recently through their investment into a renewable development platform called ConnectGen. So it's been quite a busy year internationally, along the theme of what's been reflected in the first part of this panel, in traditional energy companies growing their exposure in renewables. Low carbon fuels is interesting, and I think it's important here to segment how we think about low carbon fuels in a couple of pieces. I think historically, when somebody said low carbon fuels, we've thought about biofuels or fuels that are made out of biogenic or crop-based inputs, which are fine, but are actually somewhat difficult to scale, can be expensive, can run into challenges of kind of a dual commodity bind where the input commodities aren't necessarily linked or indexed to the output commodities. One of the things that we've been working on quite a bit lately is power to X, or taking electrons and turning those into a commodity, usually some type of fuel commodity, and that can be hydrogen or a hydrogen derivative, or industrial intermediaries like methanol, which can be a shipping fuel, can be an input into producing important and valued commodities like sustainable aviation fuel. So that's something that we've been working with a number of clients on, funding some of those initial industrial scale projects, which is a new area of finance. I think it's one that initially there's going to be a lot of equity capital formed into those. These aren't quite at the stage where they're as deeply bankable as some of the traditional renewable technologies like wind and solar, which benefit from, technically being low risk and in turn low return. But I think this is actually an exciting area as the cost of capital in the last year and a half has gone up. Interest rates have gone up. Capital is not as inexpensive as it used to be. I think companies are looking into how they might achieve higher return projects, and some of that's going to take the management and understanding of commodity exposure, which a lot of the traditional energies have as a strong suit. And I touched on offshore wind as well. I thought it was really exciting to hear the objectives in Greece of reaching 12 gigawatts of offshore. We could be sitting here in a couple of years having Greece surpass the United States in offshore wind production. We're kind of struggling here domestically in getting our industry off the ground. But we see this as an area that's going to be an important contributor as well. We've worked in Asia, where a number of the Asian companies I think are going to be the next source of large offshore wind development and capacity installation. And I think as the industry continues to mature, seeing some of that come to other parts of Europe like Greece is an area that we're paying attention to and look forward to working in as well. As Nomura, we're not a balance sheet bank, so we're not a low-cost capital provider or lender. So the components of what we provide clients are really thinking about advisory on transactions, thinking about how to help companies execute on their strategy by acquiring capabilities, technologies, assets. We think about how to intermediate in the growth capital for how these industries are being built up and how developers of new infrastructure are getting that kind of construction capital and some of that intermediate capital that sits between kind of pure risk capital and having access to the broader capital markets like the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets. And the last thing I'll say, we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years building up a next generation transport and logistics platform, which complements a lot of what's said about Greece's leadership in the maritime industry. A lot of what's going to happen in shipbuilding over the coming years, and also looking forward to new forms of bunkering fuel that are going to provision the next generations of ships that are built and progress the energy transition and shipping transportation emissions.
Thank you so much, PJ, for all this interesting intel. As always, my grave omission not to mention that you are the Managing Director and Global Co-Head of Nomura Greentech. And we move on right now to Mr. Konstantinos Mavros. Dear Konstantinos, CEO, Public Power Corporation Renewables. Konstantinos, you're in an interesting position. You're managing an entity in which the state holds a stake. Can you please brief us on energy transition in Greece, but from this angle? And a further question, can you please give us more concrete examples of this energy transition involving your company? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to zoom out a bit. That would help, I think. So why do we really need and why this energy transition is happening, actually? A is to protect the environment. We need to green the economy. B, we need to provide cheap electricity to increase competitiveness in Greece and elsewhere. And of course, there is, if we look at the recent geopolitical developments, it's very important to grant autonomy in different geographies. So this is a unique generational opportunity for Greece and other countries, specifically for Greece, to gain autonomy and to become actually, and I strongly believe that, a local superpower. in the region. So this is why we are all working systematically towards this energy transition. And what is that we do? Actually, PPC Group and, of course, all other companies working in the field, we are decarbonizing. It has been mentioned. We have been decarbonizing the euro. Now, de facto, we can see that 80% reduction has been achieved in the last 2 decades. If we look at the decarbonization issue, that creates a second pillar of the energy transition. That is the decentralized production, and that is only happening via renewables. This is the cheapest form of electricity. The LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, is quite low, and there is no doubt about it. So this is the way forward. And the last pillar of the energy transition is digitization, because all the systems to work on a decentralized matter need to be coordinated, and this is done via software solutions and, of course, digitization. And this is what we do. We all do. And, of course, at PPC, we give a strong priority on that. Now, the country, if we look at from a country perspective, I would say that the country is halfway through. Amazing things have been happening during the last 4 years, and still way to go. We are halfway again, I'd like to repeat. And we need to work vastly on that. There is an issue, and this is the elephant in this and every room, that we need to address, and this is grid connection. We need to invest heavily on all grid connections throughout the globe. And I'd like to mention 2 numbers. One would be €500 billion. €500 billion need to be invested by 2030 in the European Union only in grid connections. This is an immense amount to be invested. And the second thing, zooming out even more, on a global level, we need to refurbish or rebuild 80 million kilometers of networks to support the energy transition. This is exactly the size of the global network as we speak today. So there is a huge challenge. Now, the way we tackle the challenge at PPC Group, and we believe that we are a pioneer, we are a regional player, and we support the autonomy issue for the European Union itself, and of course for Greece. We invest very heavily, and I believe we are one of the only entities in Southeastern Europe in all kinds of renewables. So it's not only solar, it's wind, hydro, biomass, geothermal. We will be present in offshore wind quite shortly, and of course battery storage. So we need pluralism, we need to invest heavily on all technologies, and we need to support energy transition throughout. PPC has a very ambitious plan. We have already gone up to 40% of the targets announced a few years ago. So we have 2 gigawatts in operation, under construction, or in tendering process. And we feel very, very comfortable with our targets and the achievement of those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Konstantinos. Before wrapping up, I owe 1 minute to Kostas Vassiliou to discuss a little bit more about the ESG strategy of Eurobank. The floor is yours, Kostas.
I think, let's not say specifically Eurobank, but first of all, just to define how we see ESG strategy within Eurobank and the banking sector. We want, as always, to be the enablers and the facilitators of entrepreneurs and the companies. We don't want to be, we don't want to police the climate risk and the ESG implementation and transformation of each country. We see ESG in Eurobank as a huge, I repeat the word, opportunity. Why? Konstantinos just mentioned the investments that have to take place in order to transform economies. These investments require capital, requires equity capital, requires debt capital. So banks, it's our job to raise capital and through equity and capital markets, and of course provide our own balance sheet to finance these projects. Also, part of our strategy is not to exclude anyone on this process. What we're looking is actually the commitment of each company in its transition to a more green footprint. We think it's a very, very big mistake in having lists and becoming regulators and say we exclude this X, Y, Z. We believe that a lot of things will be required in this transition. the regulators themselves change their minds. What is green? What is a transitional? Fuel? And we're doing our every best in order to support all our clients in this transition strategy. Regarding our own targets, we're following them very, very diligently, and actually we have commitments in the next 3 years to disperse more than 2 billion euros in green and sustainably linked facilities. 35%, since we're discussing about energy, 35 to 40% of any financing that we will do in the energy sector, it has to be sustainable. And our target is that 20% of our overall portfolio, and I would like to remind to our audience that all Greek banks are heavily invested in the shipping industry, should be green. So conscious of time, I could talk hours for that, but conscious of time, this is pretty much the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kostas. I think we discussed today about technology, projects, financing, strategy, transition, and the likes. However, there is a central theme underpinning all this, which is called regulatory certainty. This includes political leadership committed to net zero targets, strong market demand created by policies and regulations that encourage growth, a competitive and stable tax regime, and most of all, robust rule of law. Without such regulatory certainty, energy transition will be an exercise in futility. Many politicians in this room and around, and I hope that they all hear. Thank you all. That was a really, a fantastic panel. And see you next year in New York, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.